Hi, my name is Sarah Meeks, and I am studying investigative journalism this year. In order to describe who I am and what I'm studying this year, the best thing for me to do to give you guys a good picture is to start off with a story. So, this is a good setting, so imagine you're in the mountains of Honduras. 2 years ago, I traveled to Honduras for the second time of my life. I was there on a 2-week mission trip, serving with other high school students from my church. One day, about a week into the trip, my team hiked up a mountain in order to reach a mountain village at the top. We made this trek because the village was the very definition of poverty, and we were there to help. When we reached the village, we asked what service we could be of to the villagers. The villagers immediately handed us a tacky blue paint and asked us to paint their church. I was confused at first, thinking, we just climbed up a mountain, we're here to help you guys, and you just want us to paint your church a weird color? Like, okay. And so we started the project because we were there to do exactly what they wanted us to do. But as we started painting, I began being able to speak with the people of the town or the village and got to see kind of their heart with my broken Spanish and their broken English. And I was able to learn that the reason they were having the church painted this blue color was because the paint was a repellent to the bugs in the area. They didn't like the blue color and it scared them away. And the villagers had been wanting this for so long, was the chance to go into their church services and be able to enjoy them without the irritation of the bugs surrounding them constantly. So once I found that out, I just thought it was so cool that in the midst of all of the poverty and brokenness in the village, what they wanted more than anything was to be able to enjoy their church services free from distractions. That kind of opened my eyes to a whole nother side of the world and how they realized that riches come from Christ, and despite everything that they were suffering through, that is truly what they wanted, was to be able to enjoy His presence. So later that night, after the church was painted and my team was all eating their dinner of ramen that the people of the village had prepared for us and given up their own food for our sake, I climbed out on this tree. That's a picture from the next morning. Me and my best friend did the same thing. But it's reaching out over the ledge of the mountain, and there's just a huge drop out on the tree. But I was just holding on and like looking out, and the mountains in the distance are actually Honduras. And it was nighttime at that point, and there were you could see little villages lit up, all in between here and there and over in the mountains. And I just began thinking, wow, like this is exactly what I want to do with the rest of my life, is be able to be out here and make a difference in the big wide world, not just the small Frisco bubble I've grown up in, or even the American dream bubble, but to be able to go out and experience life beyond those borders. And so that inspired me to go on a mission trip to Honduras the next summer, and I'm also going again the summer after that. But another thing that hit me while I was in Guatemala was the verse John 15:13, which is basically, it's sort of my quote for the year, but I have another one as well, and it was my quote last year at ISM, which is, "Greater love has none than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." And that's exactly how I plan to live my life, is in a way to be sacrificial for others at all times. I want to live the greatest love there is, and I believe there is risk-taking in that, and I'm open to that possibility and excited to see what the Lord has in store. So, a few other things about me. I'm adventurous, motivated, smart, protecting, obviously a follower of Christ, and I studied criminal justice last year. And that's kind of the direction that my desires after Guatemala took. They're like, well, I want to go into criminal justice, be in the FBI, or something like that. And so I studied that last year, and I loved it. My mentor was Mr. Reiner Drolshagen. He is now the supervisory special agent in charge, the assistant at the Charlotte office in North Carolina. But before, he was in charge of the drug and protocol team, the Southwest Border Squad in Dallas. And so it was so cool getting to see his experiences, and he loves the FBI. And kind of the main thing that I took away from that was like, yes, this is what I am interested, but there's a lot more paths you can go than just FBI. And he also explained, as well as everyone I interviewed that year, that you don't major in criminal justice in order to go into that field, because they'll teach you the expertise they want you to know once you get there. And so I started thinking, what are some other options that I'm interested in? And I realized I have a passion for writing. I love writing. and I love the world. And so a good combination for the two is investigative journalism abroad, which is something I've been kicking the idea around, and so I decided, okay, I'll go ahead and mentor in that this year and see where it takes me. And I'm so glad I did. It's been really exciting. I love mission trips. I'm going back to Honduras this summer, and that's something that is a big inspiration for the idea of going abroad. I don't want to let corruption stand. I want whatever I do to be fighting against corruption. And investigative journalism is a great way to bring facts to light that were previously hidden. So that's a big part of why I'm interested in it. And then it was awesome. The other night I was changing this up and got to change it from University of Undecided to University of Texas. So I'm so excited. I was accepted to the Air Force Academy, NYU, George Washington, and UT, and it kind of came down to between George Washington and UT, and I was able to finally make the decision. This is where I'm supposed to be, and my sister's there, so it's going to be great. I'll be studying in the College of Liberal Arts in the International Relations and Global Studies major, which will give me a very good setup for beginning down this pathway, and later I'll be able to define that down into either like international politics or diplomacy or journalism. So it's all very exciting. Here's my actual quote for the year by William Faulkner. "Never be afraid to raise your voice for honesty and truth and compassion against injustice and lying and greed. If people all over the world would do this, it would change the earth." This quote empowers and speaks into everything I'm hoping to do. It's the fact that people go silent so often that I think is a big part of why our world is where it is today, and I think a big part of changing the world and being able to bring, I guess, not necessarily peace because it's hard to do all that, but just bring justice is honesty. And I want whatever I'm doing to be able to uncover the darkness and dive in and find where the problems lie. So the first part of the process when I decided investigative journalism and started out for the year is research. And so a few of the key points that I found through my research was, first of all, what even is investigative journalism? What sets it apart from the rest of journalism? And that's the thing that sets it apart is the fact that it is a type of journalism that tries to discover information that the public or of public interest that someone is trying to hide. It's not just reporting on a sport or reporting on an event, it's actually uncovering something that was previously hidden. And because of this, investigative journalism and journalists are often hated or despised by people who are trying to keep things under control. So that's an interesting fact to keep in mind, but it's exciting to me because I'm fine with people not liking me for what I'm doing. Because if I'm doing what's right, there are going to be people who hate that. And that's just part of the field, and that's actually kind of a good thing. If no one's hating you, then you're doing something wrong, basically. And so journalism is like a huge field that encompasses so much, but investigative journalism is where I'm most interested. Something that people have asked me, they're like, do you really want to go into journalism? The field is shrinking. It's just, you don't know if you'll have job stability. And so I wanted to look into that because that's something that's important to me. I want to be able to provide for a family if I have one and just make my way in the world. And what I've learned is that if you truly are, if you have that entrepreneurial spirit and you're able to kind of take what the world has given you and then go find stuff for your own, not just wait for things to come to you, you can do anything with the field of journalism. It's greatly focusing more on media now and the computer, and those are the main forms of communication and news now are on the TV and the computer, and definitely print media is shrinking, but at the same time there's countless jobs out there if you know where to look. And so I thought that was good. Good to know ahead of time. And it's also interesting, one thing that I've heard from multiple people is that the main problem with the field of journalism right now is figuring out how to put a price tag on it. Because if you have to pay for an online subscription to a newspaper, everyone will be able to find the exact same news somewhere else. And so that's a big problem with the field right now, is trying to figure out how to keep it with revenue, because people don't have to pay to watch the news, and that all just comes from sponsors and commercials and whatnot. But the online articles, it's a lot harder. And so people are trying to figure that out right now, trying to kind of transition it into a new place where it's not going to just crash and burn, basically. And then another thing that I found very interesting in my third research assessment was how journalism came to be, or investigative journalism specifically. And it had been around, but it was really brought to the surface in the Watergate scandal, which is really neat. With President Nixon trying to cover up facts and everything, it was up to 2 investigative journalists to prove that he had committed fraud. Otherwise, the Washington Post wasn't going to investigate it. No one was going to, because it was such a sticky subject and the president was involved. You could get in a lot of trouble there. So 2 journalists quit their jobs at the Washington Post and researched the whole thing and found everything and uncovered it. And because of that, like, his presidency ended and the scandal was brought to light. So that kind of gave everyone an idea of, wow, this actually is very important and very prevalent to our society today, and that's when it really took off in the United States. So the next process, or the next step in the process, are your interviews, and that's honestly my favorite part, probably just because you get to have such a wide variety of opinions, and you get to see different parts of the field that you didn't even know were out there, and it's just really exciting to be able to see people who are loving what you're interested in, because then it gives you an idea of, oh wow, I could make a living out of this and I could be doing this for the rest of my life. And it's really exciting. So the first woman I interviewed was a freelance journalist. Her name is Leslie Thompson, and it was a great way to start off the year. She bought me lunch and we had a nice, good interview, and she was really relatable. And it was interesting. It was strange to me because her job as a journalist at this point doesn't really look as much like a journalist as I would even consider a journalist. She does freelance stuff, and that involves things like designing websites and that kind of thing. So it's a whole other form of journalism that I had never even considered, which is neat. And that's what she was explaining. She's like, the field is not shrinking if you're willing to adjust, and that's the main problem that the newspapers had, was when things started transitioning over to media. They were like, oh no, people will always want their Sunday morning newspaper. And because of that, that's why the field is crashing and burning, because they didn't know how to adapt. I also interviewed 2 college professors, and that was neat, kind of getting a feel for what journalism will be like in the college campus setting. So that's exciting, because if I end up going to journalism, I might have people similar to them. And then I interviewed 4 people from the Dallas Morning News: Todd Roberson, William Pry, Miles Moffett, and Sue Ambrose. Todd Roberson was the first guy he was my second interview and the first person from Dallas Morning News that I interviewed, and I was just sort of starstruck. He's won a Pulitzer Prize, he's traveled the world, he's like your very definition of an incredible investigative journalist. So getting to hear from him was so inspirational and exciting. He was telling me stories of the lives that he's changed, and just getting to hear all that was so overwhelmingly exciting. But he also explained that you have to keep in mind that it's not all fun and games necessarily, and it's not all you changing things for the better. You have to keep in mind the lives that you will be impacting as you get stories, because there were times when he was covering things in Puerto Rico and people were trying to escape the government, and he was interviewing people whose lives were then at risk if they had their names associated to his articles. And there were people who were like, oh no, put my name down, I don't care about the government. And he had to make that call. Am I going to risk their lives to make my article more credible, or am I going to keep them secret and kind of risk the possibility of people not thinking this is an actual person talking? So depending on the person, he had to make that call, and he doesn't know to this day what happened to them. So that's something I would have to be willing to live with, and he said it's hard and it's kept him up at night, but he thinks it's worth it in the long run because he has been able to impact so many lives positively. So that was my most exciting interview with Dallas Morning News, and the others were awesome too. Both Miles Moffett and Sue Ambrose are specifically in the investigative department of the Dallas Morning News. It's called the Projects team, and they had a lot to say about how awesome it is. They said it's not exactly where you start. It's kind of like a higher up form of journalism, so if that's really where you want to get, you probably have to dive into other forms of journalism first and then work your way up. So that was interesting to me, and that's at Dallas Morning News specifically. But one thing that they said was really cool was that you don't just you don't just have a deadline and this is how many stories you have to produce in this year or whatever. It's really left up to you because the editors know that in order to have a good story, you have to be able to dive in. And that's something that's very key and crucial to investigative journalists, is being able to push yourself. Because if you weren't able to push yourself and you have these relaxed deadlines, you'll never get anything done. And so that was interesting to hear, and I definitely have that ability to push myself, so I was excited about that. They also stressed the fact that you have to be very curious and open-minded, because that's how you find stories. You have to look at the world through a different lens where you wonder, why that is happening. I wonder what's going on there, that kind of thing, because without that, you'll never find a story because you won't be able to notice anything wrong. And that's where stories come from, is noticing a peculiarity and then diving in, finding people who know a little bit more and a little bit more until it just unfolds. And that's basically how it works. You have to be able to find it for yourself. I also interviewed 2 men from the Channel 8 News at WFAA TV, and they are my mentors now, and they are incredible. A few things that I learned at the actual interview was kind of what TV, broadcast, and journalism looks like versus the print media. And I liked the feeling there more because I guess Dallas Morning News has transitioned more over to just emails and sitting at your desk. And over here, it was just crazy. People were like jumping up, yelling at each other from across the room, running around, getting ready for 12 o'clock news, all that. It was just really neat. It was a very nice family environment. And there's a big room with a lot of cubicles, and then there's like offices lining it. But I honestly think the people in the cubicles really like it because they can just stand up and yell at someone across the room. And it's just cool. It's like a family environment. So I really liked it, and I learned that in order for a story to be credible, you have to have camera footage, because people aren't going to believe it on the news if you say, well, there was an accident, blah, 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 and you don't have footage. They're going to be like, well, how do I know? Which is sort of a disadvantage, because in the print media, if you're reading it, you find it a lot more believable. But they also explained that their stories are a lot shorter for the most part, because if you're playing it on the TV, it needs to be short and concise for people to stay involved and have their attention continue to be grasped. Another thing that Byron Harris explained to me, and he's one of the investigative reporters there, is this metaphor of a hospital. It's sort of like investigative journalists are doctors, but it's even more complicated because first you have to go out and search for the problem yourself and find, say, like a disease. You have to find it, and then you have to determine, is this a real disease or is this just something that's just going to blow over in a few days? And once you've determined, okay, I think this is a problem, then you have to define what the disease is or what the story is. Like defining tuberculosis versus cancer or something like that. You have to define the depth of the story, and then it's up to you. You have no idea how the story needs to be treated, and it's up to you to find a way to bring it to light in the best possible sense. So I thought that was really interesting. It's like this huge puzzle that you have to go out and find the pieces, basically, to put it together. And that was really neat. So I am now mentoring with Byron Harris and Jason Trahan, but I'll go into more of that later. I also had an interview at Fox 4 News with Becky Oliver, one of the investigative reporters there, and she was incredible. Hearing her perspectives on everything was such an incredible experience. She was one of the first female investigative journalists in the country, and she's been in the field all throughout, going through men overpowering the field to women fighting back to where it is now, which is basically a healthy balance. It's still pretty male-dominated, but it's not as hard to get in as a woman. She explained that you must be willing to take risks, even up to death threats, because she has had times where she'll report on a story and then have people, after everything's come out, people will message her on Facebook or get a hold of her email and be like, how could you ruin my life or my cousin's life or whatever? They're in jail now because of you. She'll get death threats or threats against her family, and she said that she is confident in the fact that these threats are worth it because of the work that she's doing, and she just has to be careful and keep her life private so that they don't have access to her kids or anything like that. But she said because she truly believes in what she's doing, she thinks it's worth it. So those were all of my interviews, which were all incredibly exciting. And then in the end, I ended up mentoring with Jason Trahan and Byron Harris from Channel 8 News. And they are both incredible, and I really like the whole ratio of having 2 mentors because they're able to bounce ideas off of each other, and if one's not available, the other one can step in, and they're more comfortable and they're able to joke with each other. So we've had a really good time. This was from my interview with Byron Harris, and it was just cool. He's arguably one of the best investigative journalists in the country, or arguably the best. And so it was really cool getting to hear from him and everything and being able to work with him. He's been in the field for over 40 years, and he has won awards upon awards upon awards. He's not willing to just give up his camera. He's very aggressive in his beliefs. If he believes that what he is searching for is right and that there's a story, he is going to keep on pressing. There have been times when he's been arrested in the past for covering stories with the Russian mafia, tensions in the Congo, Area 51, because when he knows that there's a story, he's not going to stop until he finds it. So he's won 6 DuPont Columbia batons, which is a huge accomplishment. That's basically, DuPont is the equivalent of a Pulitzer Prize for broadcast journalism, and so that's a huge accomplishment. My other mentor is Jason Trehan, and he worked at Dallas Morning News before he came to Channel 8, and he loves it. He loves just the more exciting field and the more exciting feeling of everything, and even the liberty that he has to make decisions on his own and find stories and help out Byron and Brett Shipp and the other investigative reporters at Channel 8. And what I love about him and having him as a mentor is how much he loves his job. In the interview, he's like, I mean, I get paid to do this. How awesome is that? And that's exactly what I was looking for in a mentor, is someone who truly loves what they're doing and feels that what they're doing is important. And that's been so beneficial throughout the mentorship, because he has so many great ideas and he loves what he's doing, so he's making my experience incredible. So the next step in the whole process, once I've had a mentor, seen some stuff, is to create an original work, which is basically a project that will take about a month and a half to complete, that gives you an idea of what the field looks like and kind of helps you dive in before starting your final product. So some of my personal goals in the original work was that I wanted it to be beneficial to my mentors, because I didn't want them to just feel like they're having to take a bunch of time on this. I wanted it to be educational about the field to me personally, so that I could learn some stuff that will actually be helpful. I wanted it to be interesting so that I wouldn't get bored halfway through and be like, man, this is going to be a long year, that kind of thing. And I wanted it to be beneficial to society as well, if possible. And I think what we ended up doing kind of hit the nail on the head, and I'm really excited about everything we accomplished. So we didn't have time to write a whole story in that month, but we did do open records requests and FOIA requests, which are basically any citizen can do it, but don't know how the process works, and journalists use them all the time. It's a way, there's laws, the open records laws that tell you have access to these pieces of information, such as public officials' emails and that kind of thing. And Jason has a huge board of all of the outcoming or all of the ongoing requests he has, just all thumbtacked to the emails, so that he knows I'm still waiting on this for this story, and still waiting on this one for that. And it's an interesting process, because sometimes you get a lot of information back in regards to the story you were covering, and sometimes you get nothing. But the open records requests are more on like the local level or the state level, and then the FOIA is national for people who work for national departments and things like that. So we ended up filing requests from each, and it was in regards to all of the earthquakes that were occurring in Irving, and they still kind of are, but it's died down somewhat. But it was when everything was starting and questions were occurring, like, is it from fracking? Is it just a natural phenomenon? Should we be concerned? All of that. So I filed a request with the city of Irving, looking for emails between them and a seismologist, Craig Pearson. And it was interesting. Well, we were trying to get information from him specifically because he has been kind of the seismologist who's been putting his words out there like, oh no, everything's fine, that kind of stuff, kind of covering the whole event. But we were wondering if anything had happened between emails between him and the mayor or any other city officials trying to cover things up. So that was an interesting experience, and we didn't get too much back from that. just because it appeared that he really was being honest. But that's good to know. Sometimes the ones that you file don't come back with some huge shocking evidence, but they show you that, okay, maybe this isn't where I need to be focusing my attention. And that one came back to us really quickly, so that was nice. And then we also filed the FOIA with the USGS, the U.S. Geology Survey, who they're based in California, and they cover all of the seismic activity in the United States, kind of controlling or looking at everything. And we asked them for emails between them and Craig Pearson and the city of Irving and the city of Dallas. We tried to cover everything we could, the police departments, just to kind of get a full picture. And they did show us some stuff about like police reports of people being really worried about their houses and stuff like that. It wasn't anything shocking, like, oh, it is due to fracking, we know for sure, but it was helpful to see kind of the underlying fear in the city that wasn't being covered to the fullest extent, perhaps. And so that one took a little longer to come back to us, but it was definitely beneficial to their story, which is what I was wanting. It helps them not have to do that on their own time, and they were able to take that in. Another thing that I did for the story itself was locating the sites for the wells where the what's it called? The waste is let out of the fracking wells. That was what they were kind of wondering, was if maybe that was causing the problems with the earthquakes and everything. And so I was able, Byron Harris didn't know how to find those wells. He showed me a website. He's like, I think this is how you do it, or I think this is where you're able to find the wells. And I was able to search through all of Tarrant and Dallas County and find where those sites are, so that they could then go to some key ones after I looked up, this one's active, this one's out of use, this one had been shut down, that kind of thing. I pointed that out and found them on the map and wrote him a list of each well specifically in Dallas County and Tarrant County. So then he was able to choose some of the ones that looked like there were sketchier circumstances and go and talk to the people there. So that was exciting to me, just being able to kind of be part of the story itself. And then the top video is a little, once the story was kind of completed, this was sort of a little commercial for the story itself, like a coming soon, news on the earthquakes in Irving. So go ahead and play that.
You want answers?
Why all of a sudden do we have earthquakes?
We do too.
These earthquakes are not minor to us.
So we sent the best investigative team in the nation to get some. All this week, News 8 investigates the controversial link between drilling and a growing North Texas earthquake problem. From what top seismologists have to say, to the extreme actions other states have taken on the fracking industry, we travel the country to get answers for you. News 8 investigates tonight at 10.
All right, so that was sort of a precursor to the story, and
There was another earthquake.
Byron traveled to, I believe he went to Georgia?
You want answers?
Okay, well that's supposed to play, but actually I have it. Byron traveled to, where was he? He traveled out of state and was asking for answers and all that stuff. And then this was kind of his story that he ended up covering, and I'll play part of it to kind of show everything that they found in this particular story. This was, he and some other investigative reporters were all working on it together, and this was his segment.
What happened here? They are.
As you are, according to a Columbia University geologist, the number of earthquakes in the central United States is up 1,000% in the last 30 years. But why? Well, this week, News 8 reporters will take you to 4 states, talking to homeowners, we'll talk to scientists and state officials to try to find some answers.
But before you can understand those answers, you have to really know what you're talking about. So tonight, Byron Harris